wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Leah Follett. Welcome to A Quirky Journey. Join us as we share our family's journeys to good health. You'll find plenty of inspiration, tips and recipe ideas, as well as stories from everyday people who've struggled and overcome health problems and diet challenges in their own families. I'm Jo Whitten, author of the blog and book Quirky Cooking, and today I have with me Mary Mackenzie from Good Mood Food. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jo. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you again. We had a great time doing the podcast last time. Your story was absolutely fascinating, and if anyone listening to this hasn't heard the first podcast with Mary, I'm trying to think what number it was. It's about 3 back.
Yeah.
It's the one with
anaphylaxis and allergies.
That's it. Anaphylaxis and allergies, FPIES, and hope for healing, something like that. But there was a big mouthful to put in the title there. I was trying to make sure that people knew what was on there, but I have had so much feedback from that. People just cried when they listened to it, Mary.
Yeah, it was really good, wasn't it? It really touched people. I was really happy with that. Yeah.
I just think there's so many people with unbelievably hard lives because of health issues, and to give them hope is a really beautiful thing, to see that other people have gotten through it. And that's why we wanted to do this podcast on anxiety and depression, because both of our families have had struggles in this area. And I get questions all the time from people who need help with anxiety and depression and just want to know, is there things you can do with the diet to help? And yes, there definitely is, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. You know, it's I really believe that hope is all a human being needs to survive. Is the door to hope needs to be open, and then it doesn't need to be rushed. You can take baby steps. And
that's what we want to talk about today. So baby steps towards healing and getting through anxiety and depression, and ways to move forward. Even if you're not really thinking of doing full gaps, or that's way too overwhelming at first, we're going to talk about ways that you can begin to heal the gut and to get through this really rough time. And Mary has definitely been there, and I've been there with my son Isaac, and you can make a really big difference. So, Mary, do you want to, just because a lot of people may not have heard your first story, do you want to just give a really quick overview about the anxiety depression side of your story and how things are looking now after a couple of years?
Sure. When I think back to that period of time where I was depressed and suffering from anxiety, it was a more holistic kind of depression and anxiety. It wasn't necessarily because of the way I was eating, although that was a huge contributing factor. It was that life had gotten on top of me, definitely.
And I think that's usually the way. It's not just food.
So, yeah. And I know that diet did make a huge impact on fully healing the anxiety and depression so that it won't come back. But I did have to go through the process of accepting it and acknowledging that I was not well. I had to get diagnosed. I had to seek counseling. I had to go on medication. And all of those things were an important part of my journey, and I don't regret them for a moment. I know that there are a lot of people out there who have healed depression and anxiety without the medication, but I certainly wasn't in a position to do that. I was just...
And I think we should make that clear right from the start that if you're bad enough that you are not coping at all, you really may have to have medication, and we're not saying.
Yeah, and it's not something that has to last forever. I was on it
exactly
for a year from the day I started to the day I finished was 1 year.
I know I'm interrupting your story. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
While I'm thinking of it, and while we're on the issue of medication, I just wanted to say that Isaac had to go onto medication at the start because he was shocking. None of us were coping, and even for us to have to wait 2 weeks for the diet to start helping or whatever was too much. So
my doctor was the one who convinced me to go on medication because I had resisted it through. Yes. I'll go into the details of where the depression was, but I'd resisted it after my first pregnancy, and I basically went into my second pregnancy still depressed.
Oh, that's not good.
Post that birth, then it was really, really bad. Yeah. And if I had dealt with it after the first pregnancy, it probably wouldn't have been so bad. But that was my journey. But my doctor said to me, you've got to look at the state that you're in as if you've got a broken arm and you've put a Band-Aid on it to fix it. It's not going to fix with a Band-Aid. And the medication was the cast that I put on my broken arm. Because to be honest, I had heard about GAPS. Yeah. And I knew about GAPS for 3.5 years before we were actually able to mentally do it. And that was because I was suffering from depression.
Yeah.
So
anything like that would be too overwhelming when you're in the depths of depression.
I mean, if you can't get out of bed, how are you going to cook GAPS for
Exactly.
And so the medication was very, very good for me to heal that broken arm, that metaphor of healing my mind, so that I could get myself into a position where I could cope.
Sort of boosted you up to the position where you could start healing, wasn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so what happened was, for me, I think I've had depression before in my lives in my 20s. Never ever diagnosed or acknowledged. I just look back on particularly dark periods in my life.
Yeah.
So I suppose you would say that I had chronic depression after my 20s, really after I left home, and I stayed back in South Africa and my parents immigrated, and there were these big life events that contributed to it. There was also the health things. I had some serious health issues. I had glandular fever. I had to have huge antibiotic. I think it was 6 months of a very strong antibiotic, and it was for a misdiagnosis, and then developed chronic fatigue syndrome. Then I started having hypoglycemic seizures. So you can see that my physical state didn't support a great mental health at a time.
And people that I know, like my sister and my assistant, actually also that have struggled with chronic fatigue and glandular fever, that in itself is very depressing, because you want to be able to go and do things and work, and you just can't.
Absolutely, and you don't really. At the time that I had it, there was cynicism about it. It was in my head, or there was no relief from it. There was certainly no medication.
Nothing you could do.
I now, in retrospect, have a huge understanding of chronic fatigue and how the gut is related to that, and how the antibiotics contributed to it, and all of those things.
We'll have to do another podcast on that.
Oh, yeah, it's phenomenal. And chronic fatigue is a really tough one to heal from, but you can absolutely heal from it, because I don't think I ever fully recovered from it until GAPS. And that was, I remember the day that I started feeling like I wasn't tired at bedtime. Oh, my gosh. What an incredible thing to not be tired at bedtime. But, there was lots of little red flags that I now can look back on and see where the depression came from, but also where the gut health contributed to that depression. And it's all, it was a mixed bag of hard things happening in my life, as well as medical crises, I suppose you would call them.
Yeah, and imbalances in the gut and everything else.
Yeah, and in my 20s, I made some pretty shocking choices for myself physically. Certainly, I drank too much, and I was partying really hard when I went to London. I certainly didn't help myself with nutrition. I didn't really know anything about diet, and the seizures got a bit worse, and my mental health got a bit worse. And
when you say seizures, what do you mean? Did you have?
So I would have these hypoglycemic crashes. Seizures is probably not quite the word, but I would literally just feel everything drain. I would hit a low blood. I'd have a low blood sugar incident. And if somebody didn't straight away feed me Coke straight from a can, I would end up comatose and in hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was quite...
That was full on.
Full on, and I was a bit lost at that time.
So you must have been on a roller coaster.
And making lovely bad choice after bad choice, just...
vicious circle.
Yeah, vicious circle wasn't... I just didn't have the maturity to really cope with that kind of a health crisis. Anyway... And so this carried on. And then I met my husband when we were doing a ski season, and he really had a handle on good nutrition, and not particularly good nutrition, just better than I was.
Yeah.
Fresh veggies.
Real food.
Not just junk food all the time. And he helped, and that made a huge difference. Just in the first year of having known my husband, the seizures stopped just from eating a diet that had more fruit and vegetables in it. I didn't cut anything out. It was just amazing how quickly the body kind of grabs onto that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had a really good time. We cooked a lot and we had a good marriage. We did a lot of travel and my mental health was much better. Still had the chronic fatigue in the background. I just didn't have as much energy. We'd go and play tennis and I could only last 1 or 2 games. And we started to just think this was just who I was. We stopped thinking about it too hard. And then I felt pregnant and I had my boy, and his health issues basically sent me into a real downward spiral of trauma, because we had this little boy who was so allergic and so sensitive to light and sound. He couldn't sleep. He didn't eat. He was just, for a first-time mum, and by my nature, I was fairly happy-go-lucky, but I was also a little bit of a denialist, as we can see from the past. Want to see that there was something wrong. And then the vomiting, he would vomit so many times during the day, and I still didn't want there to be anything wrong with my precious little bundle. And then it eventually just, it took me, I suppose, is the best way of saying it. It just took all my serotonin, and it took my sense of balance, and I became highly anxious. I had triggers. If my son vomited, I actually couldn't deal with him. Wow. I would leave the room while this child was vomiting. There was some really, and I would be having panic attacks in the other room while my child was vomiting. And so it was really, really bad, actually. It's funny. I always tell the story of the day when I really realized there was something quite wrong, was when I was sitting in the bottom of a shower, fully dressed, with my son, with the shower on.
Oh, my goodness.
Crying, because we were both just covered in vomit. And it was just like,
you poor thing.
Oh, no, poor me.
Oh, that's just awful.
Well, it was awful, but it was...
How old was he?
He must have been about 6 months old. So it was when we started him on solids that it really ramped up. Because we knew that he wasn't coping very well on dairy, but when we started him on solids, we started to fail almost every food that we tried. Or we'd pass it for a few days, and then you'd cook up a huge batch of food and only fail it, after you've done all that cooking. It was, and it just literally, the experience of that trauma left me feeling like my whole world had been kind of pulled out from under me. Yeah. Because in the past, the she'll be right attitude kind of got me through, Yeah. It's always turned out all right in the end. But when you're a mother and it's your first baby and you just don't know what to do, and the doctors don't seem to know what to do either.
That's when it's hard. And it's like you said earlier, if you have hope, you have everything.
Yeah.
And it's taken away from you, you just plunge down.
What was interesting was that I had no hope to give myself, because I didn't know what to do, and the doctors didn't give me much hope either. There was a real absence of hope in this time, and that's when you really can plunge into quite a dark place, and you lose perspective.
Yeah.
And not only do you lose perspective mentally, but I had health issues, so there was nothing in my body to help me to restore perspective.
No.
On a nutritional level or a physiological level. I had my wonderful husband who ended up, actually, interestingly enough, I ended up going back to work because I wasn't coping at home. And he stopped working. We were living in England at the time. He stopped working and came and looked after my son. I had this godly thing happen where it was an answered prayer in a very dark time, where the job that I had, I was working for PepsiCo in England, and they allowed me to come back full-time, but to work from home 3 days a week and only come to the office 2 days a week.
That's good.
I had my husband at home, and there was just this period of settled, this period of recovery. And I think that's why I managed to deny the depression side of it, because I'd found this safe little nest where I was at home with my family, but I was working and earning money so I could step away from the trauma. So this little fake world that I lived in for 6 months. And then my son got a lot worse, and we made a decision to move back to Australia to get the help that we needed, because we weren't getting it in the UK under the NHS. It was just difficult to get seen by specialists.
I have heard that.
And I was sick of battling, and when I could battle if I was mentally well. I think I could have. But I wasn't mentally well, so how do you battle and advocate for your child when
all you want to do is curl up in bed? So how?
Exactly, you can't even advocate for yourself, So, so we moved back to Australia, and straight away we got what we needed. We got a diagnosis for Daniel of severe allergies, EpiPens, which we'd never had in England. Got regular appointments with a top-notch allergist. We got him onto a formula to help him to start regaining weight because he dropped down to the 25th percentile. And we got counseling for myself, which was all the things that I needed. So I got onto the mental health plan here and started seeing a counselor. I was now pregnant with my second child. And funny how the depression and the anxiety came out in different ways. Now it came out in terms of I started to freak out about labor. I had a tough labor with Danny, but it was, it was tough, but it wasn't the worst labor in the world. I delivered naturally. I had a water birth. I damaged my pelvis. And so this became now a trigger for me to have these panic attacks. And as if it was the worst thing in the world to imagine myself having to go through that again. To the point where in the last month of pregnancy, the doctors could see that I mentally was not coping, and they said, do you just want to have a C-section? And I was like, oh, thank you, please. Yes, can I just have a C-section? And again, in retrospect, at the time, that was the right thing for me to do with my mental health. So there's all these things. I advocate natural vaginal birth. I advocate making sure your gut bacteria is right for that. But at the time that I was pregnant with my daughter, that was the right thing for me to do.
It was survival mode.
Yeah, and it was. And it was another moment where I thank God, that option was available to me. A social medical system where we didn't have the money to pay for a C-section. So I could have an elective C-section through Medicare to save my mental health. And it was brilliant. And then again, entered this little bubble of a world with Edie where it was lovely for 6 months. Okay. And then there was this moment when Edie was 6 months old. We were going to Moreton Island for a holiday, and we were about to get on the ferry, and my mum came over to our car window and told me that my brother and my brother's wife had just had their 20-week scan for their second child and had found out that the baby probably wasn't going to survive. And I had nothing. That was when I had my crash. That was when I had my proper crash. I had nothing to deal with that. No resources to cope with the idea of a baby not surviving out of the womb. And that was when I felt, on that ferry, I felt my knees just give way. I felt everything disappear. I had nothing left. And that was when real, proper, debilitating depression set in. And it was probably the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. It was like a darkness where there's no light. It was like the color was no longer in the sky or the leaves on the trees. There was nothing in the world to be happy about. And I think when you think about depression, you think about if you think about this line, a straight line, and we have waves where sometimes we go above that line and sometimes we go below that line. But we generally stay around that line of life and happiness and contentment and ups and downs. I was having the same waves, the same up and down waves, but I was about 3 meters below that line. My highest moments weren't even the lowest moments most people are having on a daily basis. My highs were still lower than most people's lows, and my lows were as low as a human can go. And it was very scary. It was a good wake-up call because now it was time to be medicated. And now it was, I have 2 children to look after, and
that's the thing, isn't it? That's the scary thing.
Exactly, yeah. And I understood the physiological side of it, that actually my serotonin had always been so borderline, and now it just disappeared.
Plummeted,
Yeah, and it disappeared. I just want to go back to the story about my brother. And you've never seen a baby so prayed over as this child. She was born and she survived 10 days out of the womb, but it gets better. Then she wouldn't give up. This little baby just wouldn't give up. She wasn't even supposed to survive 2 hours outside the womb. They ended up operating on her heart. She turned 4 last week.
Oh my goodness, that's so happy.
She's a little miracle baby, and she has she's got some little developmental delays that are probably difficult for her mum, to have to work through. But I think everyone
nothing like what
Thanks.
they would have had to work through.
No, she's alive. And they said she wouldn't walk, and she's walking.
Oh.
They said she'd never talk, and at the moment she's signing, so she's perfectly cognizant. She can sign and
That's amazing.
Anyway, so that was a nice outcome.
That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, so then I went on the medication, and straight away I felt the anxiety lift, and it was brilliant. And it gave me a year, and I started to get my head around food now, because my son was now deteriorating at a rapid rate, losing all safe foods and living on formula. And so I knew I had to do something. And this is the point that I wanted to make. Is somebody had given me that GAPS book when my son was 18 months old, and we'd just come back from England. And I read it, and I knew it was true. I knew it. And I also put it down because I knew there was no way I could do that. No way. And now that I was feeling better, and like I had climbed out of the chasm, even though I was still camped on the banks of that chasm and looked down to it every now and then, I started to see that potentially we could do this. And we did baby steps with him, because there's that whole question of how do you feed a child that is allergic to everything? Yeah. Feed them food that they're allergic. We learned through other mums who'd been through it about starting with a drop of broth. That was our start. And we noticed immediate healing just from introducing broth. And then, and this I could cope with, this I could cope with. Anyway, and then our journey went on to us going on to GAPS intro. We did 6 weeks of intro, and then moved on to full GAPS. And the healing that came was just out of this world. Yeah. But the amazing thing was I felt myself, I always talk about it like this. I had my tent camped on the side of this black chasm, and I was safe. I was in my tent, but I was looking down into this chasm, and I was worried, this is metaphoric, but I was worried that at night I might roll off into the chasm. You know what I mean? It was like this constant reminder that it was still right there and it could take me at any time. Yeah. When we did GAPS, I picked up my tent and I picked up my sleeping bag and I hiked 10 freaking kilometers away from that chasm. And I have never, ever been near or even seen any hint of it since. Wow. So there was this healing that happened through the medication, but then there was this whole other level of healing that happened when I went through the process, the difficult process of healing an adult body using the GAPS protocol, that I know I'm pregnant now for the 3rd time. Wow. I hope to be able to come back to when this baby is born and when it's a year old and say to you, look what I did. I didn't get stressed. My child is allergic. We have this wonderful health.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I have, and I feel that. I feel different.
Yeah. Oh, you must. Yeah. So. One of the people that I've interviewed on the podcast is Dr. Oscar Serelak. Have you heard that podcast interview?
Postnatal depletion.
Yeah.
I had that. Yes.
Oh, you definitely had that. And if anyone's listening and has sort of been in the same boat with all the postnatal depression and everything, you desperately need to listen to that podcast. It is so good.
It is and one leads to the other. Depletion.
It does.
It makes
and the thing that I found interesting too is a lot of people think postnatal depression is straight after having a baby, but it's something that can build up, and the peak time is 4 years after having a baby.
Oh, it just blows my mind.
And people think, well, that's just not related. Well, it is. You're so depleted and it's just getting worse and worse. You've got to heal the body.
If you don't replete, like he said, what do you expect will happen? There's a scientific pathway that you are on, that if you are depleted and you don't replete those minerals, and makes so much sense.
And the thing is, like you said, you were already really unwell with all the chronic fatigue and all the the bad diet and the drinking and the stress and everything. To have a baby on top of that, your body would have just been like, oh my goodness, what is she doing to me?
Exactly. I think my body did. It gave me a kick in the butt. It was like, seriously,
get me well first.
In the Native American cultures, they advocate, I think it's 4 years between each baby.
Wow.
Yeah. And I always used to think, well, that's just doesn't suit our culture, because we all wait till our 30s till we have our babies, and then we.
That's true. Yeah. A lot of people just pump them out quickly and done now, over with. And then mum is wrecked for 10 years.
Yeah, that's it. Get it done with.
Oh, wow. So if you could talk about what you did to begin, some of the things like you said to me about putting one foot in front of another and doing what you can little by little, and giving yourself time to get well. Have you got some tips for people who feel very overwhelmed in their depression and anxiety and don't know where to begin? GAPS is too much. What's some small steps that they can begin to take?
The first bit of advice that I would give has nothing to do with food. It has to do with time.
Yeah.
And my advice would be, don't put a time scale on your healing.
That's so true.
Don't say, I'm going to start tomorrow. The amount of pressure you're putting on yourself to cut out an enormous amount of foods and to bring in an enormous amount of foods that you aren't used to cooking, that can become so overwhelming that you never start.
Yes.
So
you start and then give up very quickly.
Oh, yeah, because it's too much. It's just too much, especially if your mental health isn't right. So when I'm coaching people, I always say to them, and you get a lot of people who just don't want to do it, but they know they have to do it, but they don't want to do it. And there's this beautiful saying that says, change usually only ever happens when it becomes more difficult to stay where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so when you've reached that point, and for some people I'd say try and change before you reach that point, because that point's really hard and horrible. But don't feel like
it's pretty much human nature, isn't it?
It is such human nature. But I have friends who have watched our journey and haven't even really needed to do it, and yet have introduced just one little thing over a period of 2 years. They've taken, and suddenly their child isn't having such severe asthma anymore, or they, there's no more bloated tummies that they noticed, like little tiny symptoms that you wouldn't think you'd need to overhaul your whole diet for. Yeah. Where if you just change one thing once a month, or once every 6 months, depends on what you can cope with. Look at it like a life journey, just one of those things that you want to experiment with, that you don't have to put the pressure on yourself to do what some people do. Like, don't even look at it like you have to do what we did. We had to do it because our son was
so sick.
He wasn't going to make it, really. So we did what we had to do because that was our change had come, our time for change had come. But I always say to people, start with broth.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Get used to cooking it. Experiment with it. Do you like to cook the meat with the bones, or do you just like to cook the bones? And just start by having a tablespoon of broth a day, and freeze it so that you've got some there for the next time you think, I might try that again. And just experiment with it until you'll find that your body will respond to broth. It's an incredible thing. I've had friends experiment with broth who were incredibly skeptical about the health benefits of it. And my friend came to me and she said, I didn't know I was anxious until I've realized that the anxiety is lifting.
Wow.
She was having, by that stage, a cup of broth every day. And, I think we all live with anxiety and depression.
Yeah, we do. In our stressful society, it's sort of something that it's that cloudiness even. It might not be panic attacks, but it can just be that dull, cloudy feeling.
That kind of detached feeling, and you've had your marriage, you've had your children, and you're still not quite happy. You know what I mean? What's that detached feeling about? And sometimes that's anxiety. That's and I just. I feel that we've all, as a society, we've come to accept so many things as normal. Which aren't normal. They're common. Sure, they're common, but they're not normal.
Yeah, I agree.
To this habit of believing, because everyone else is kind of going through the same thing, that it must be normal. There's a lot of stuff our society goes through these days that's not normal. And sometimes you only actually realize it's not normal once you've healed from it.
That's right.
Amazing experience.
It's like when you get glasses and you go, my daughter experienced this. She went to the end of grade 2 without us realising she needed glasses, and she couldn't actually see the blackboard. And she was just like, the leaves on the trees, and she just couldn't believe the difference. But you don't know that until you get the glasses.
It's like the best metaphor I've ever heard, because sometimes doing gaps and just doing the basics, bringing in some healing foods rather than concentrating on what you have to take out, which everyone freaks out about, taking out grains in particular. Everyone freaks out about that for good reason. Grains are tasty. Just bringing in a couple of the healing foods, it's like putting on glasses when your eyesight hasn't been good, and you suddenly see the world through new eyes. And that, what I've seen happen so often is people who are dead against doing gaps, but they really want some healing. So they bring in broth, and then when they get a handle on broth, they feel better. And so they're like, okay, well, maybe I'll try the sauerkraut next.
Yes.
They start fermenting. And within a year or two, they're full gaps without even having realized.
Yeah,
they were heading
naturally starting to eat very traditional foods, very healing foods, nutrient dense. Get rid of the fluff and fillers, and then you're pretty much doing gaps.
And then your body starts to kind of tell you what it needs, and you start to notice that when you eat pasteurized dairy, for example, your mood drops.
Yeah.
And so you start to think, well, maybe I'll cut that out. This period could take 5 years, it could take 3 months. It depends on you and your ability and your mental health. But it's really it's about having a conversation with your body again, which we've all stopped having. Yeah.
I think we should too mention with medication, don't give yourself a time for I'm going to be off it by this time. I don't know. What do you think? It's just...
No, I agree 100%. Yeah.
My son, like when he went on, we were so bad. Things were so bad. He had to go on it. There was no way out of it.
Yeah.
But I was determined he was going to be off it by 6 months. I didn't want him to be on it, and I was just like, we got to the end of the 6 months and I was like, come on, Isaac, you need to get off it. And he's like, and he just cried and he's like, I'm so scared. I can't do it. I'm frightened that I'm going to go right. Like you said, camping on the edge of that abyss. He was so scared he was going to go dropping straight back down into it. And I thought he would be ready by then because we'd done so much healing with the food side of things. And the psychologist had just raved about how quickly he'd moved through all the stages and he was doing so well. But no, he wasn't ready.
Wasn't ready.
And it's been a year and he's just coming off it now, and he's ready to come off it now, and he's made that decision himself. I've pulled back a bit. I've encouraged him, you don't want to be on it all your life.
You have to give them that choice. It was this, what's interesting, Jo, is what you say is exactly what I did. And, I can give all the advice in the world about not putting timescales on it, but I put a timescale for myself on getting off medication. I put a timescale on how long I was willing to do intro.
Yeah.
Put a timescale on how long I was willing to do gaps.
Yeah.
And I only learned the lesson on the third go, which was gaps. We started trying to wean ourselves off by introducing potatoes and starches, and there was no allergic reactions, which was brilliant.
Yeah.
But there was a general slide back into symptoms of like coughing and vomiting, and it's such a lesson in life to just let go of trying to control these outcomes.
Don't push it. And it's frustrating too when you see other people who seem to be going quicker than you, and it's like, well, how come I can't go off it yet? Why can't I have dairy yet? Why can't I have ghee? And then it's just so frustrating, and you just want to push it. But
it's interesting because I think what you're doing when you use those words in your head are you're reintroducing hopelessness. Because you start to say, well, I'm never going to heal. This was a waste of time. We shouldn't have done this. This was the wrong journey.
Yeah.
But it's got nothing to do with that. All it's got to do with is time and relinquishing control and just taking your baby steps, putting your head down, bum up, and carrying on with your journey.
And not looking at, what's the time limit, but just what's today. Let's focus on today.
What are we eating today? What are we eating today? And, and it's so funny because we deteriorated a little bit when we tried to introduce potatoes and sourdough. And it took us 1 week to get back to where we were. So my son, as soon as we started doing that, he started to cough on eggs again. And I was like, then the old trauma comes back because that's a trigger, isn't it?
That's right. Scary.
Like, oh my gosh, he's still allergic. What have we done? All of this has been for a waste. And I went back to the GAPS website and I read the FAQs, and they say,
they're good, aren't they?
Oh, they're so good. And she just puts it so simply. She says, if a child's symptoms are regressing, their microbiome is regressing. So what do you do when the microbiome is regressing? You pump up the probiotic foods and you pump up the broth. And so we did that for 1 week. I mean, I was picturing us having to go back to repeat intro.
I know, that's what scares me.
But for 1 week, we pumped everything up, and suddenly the eggs are back on the table, and everything's fine, and the coughing stopped, and oh my goodness, so simple.
Oh, that's a relief.
And it's such a good thing to keep in mind when you've been on the full journey. Symptoms, if you're regressing, then the microbiome is regressing. It's such a simple answer.
So, and I think also my kids, they often want to know, they're like this in all areas, they want to know schedule, what's happening this week, what's happening today, how long are we on GAPS for, they want to know timings, but it's trying to teach them also that we just are going day by day, one step at a time. I don't know how long this is going to take. Most people take 1 to 2 years, but we're just not worrying about a time limit.
Yeah.
We're just working on getting well, and living well and eating well, and we're not going to worry about a time limit.
In the beginning, it was only by applying a time limit that I could get the kids.
That's true. If you give them a hope, I suppose, and I think that did help at the start. You're right. But now it's more.
They come on the journey with you of learning to relinquish control.
Yeah, that's what it is.
They see the regression and they see that they actually, now it's easy. We eat this way. This is just how we eat, and they love it. That's right.
Yeah, and that's what I've said to them. Yes, eventually you will be able to add some other things back in, and they're looking forward to sourdough.
Yeah, I know sourdough's the big one. Sourdough pancakes. That's the one. Yeah.
But it's kind of they're sort of coping a lot better with, because full gaps, like we were talking earlier, I think before we started recording. Yeah. When you've done intro, full gaps is heaven. It's just like, it's so easy. What is everyone whinging about?
And that's an interesting thing, because I found every other journey we've been on has been an elimination diet where we ended up having to eliminate more and more and more.
Really?
And it became more and more hopeless. But with gaps, you start off with nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
Every day is a joy because you're bringing in more and more things. And for us, it was food that we hadn't been able to eat.
Every time we brought in a new food on intro, my kids were like, party time. They were so excited. I love pumpkin. I love eggs.
Pumpkin pancakes are awesome.
Oh, I've got to tell you this. It was so funny. My our friends they're always having my kids over. They're kind of like out their second family. They've got 11 kids, and they never notice if there's more. So one of my Isaac was over there the other day staying the night, and the father came to me the next day and he said it was so funny. He said he makes his own food when he's there. If there's not something that he can eat, they'll just say, well, here's the meat and veggies, and he just goes and cooks something.
That's wonderful.
And he got the red cabbage out of the fridge and he was slicing it up, and the dad walked past him and he said I couldn't stop giggling because I could hear him going, oh, yum, 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 as he sliced up the red cabbage. I mean, what 13-year-old does that? He thought it was hilarious. And I said, well, what did he do with it? And he said, he fried it up with onions and carrots, and I don't know. He said the carrots he cut a bit thick and so they were crunchy, but he's going, it's okay. Carrots are good crunchy. I don't mind them crunchy. He's just so positive about it all.
I know. My son is hilarious. He couldn't eat veggies. He had he used to eat rice with rice milk and a sprinkling of sugar, and that was his meal every single day for 5 years. It was just awful. And but he, the veggies, you couldn't even get him to try a veggie. He would clamp his mouth shut because he had this experience of food
phobia of them.
Yeah, but now he gets so excited. Oh, butternut.
Yes.
It's roast butternut. This voice that comes out of him is like, it's hilarious. I know. He just loves his veggies and broccoli. We go to the shops, and he's like, Mom, look how much broccoli there is. Really?
I think people must think our kids are from another planet when they haven't been through this sort of process. But honestly, for all of those of you out there listening who have kids that hate veggies or have terrible issues with food and pickiness, GAPS is amazing in the way it helps with that. It really is.
I always say to people, because they say, yeah, it's all right for you because your kids will eat veggies, but my kids are too fussy. And I'm like, no. If my son can do it,
anybody can.
Food is going to kill him and would clamp his mouth. If he can learn to eat veggies, then anybody can. And it is the most thrilling experience for a mother to be able to nourish her children with vegetables. It really is the most experience. Yeah.
So I think we got through one step there.
Yeah. Sorry.
So time. Okay, next one.
Yes, moving along.
Do you have another? Did you have more?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait. What were we?
I think you were going to give us some steps towards.
Oh, steps. Sorry.
You're okay.
Ask me a question.
You were waiting for me, and I was waiting for you.
Yes. So the broth is the first step.
Yeah.
The fermented vegetables is the next thing that you would try. And the good thing about them is they take time to ferment, so you really do have time on your side when it comes to fermenting veggies. There's lots of recipes on the internet. You can do it either with whey liquid with a vegetable starter, or just with salt if you're using organic cabbages. And to give it a go, give it a go. And often when you start these things, the first batch fails. It gets mold on top and you have to throw it away and try again. But as long as you have removed the clock, then all of this is just learning experiences.
Oh,
It's
that's
not
really good. I think that's so
pressure.
important. Yeah, don't be
It's so
pressured.
important. Yeah. I think that's humans do that. We live by the clock, and the minute you remove that clock, you feel this massive weight off
Yeah.
your shoulders.
That's so true.
Yeah, and even actually, I would suggest that one of those steps is a commercial probiotic, not the ones that you can buy from the chemist, because they've got two or three strains in it. And the reason you would have a commercial probiotic is to reintroduce strains that are missing from our society, like plantarum and so those soil probiotics that we no longer have in our soil.
Okay.
So I would look for a probiotic that has between 6 and 11 strains in it. And a lot of people feel immediate mental health relief from these broad spectrum probiotics.
So have you got any brands that you could mention?
Yeah, we use a brand called BioCult. It was the original kind of one that I think Natasha Campbell McBride, who wrote the GAPS book, developed. I know it's got some fillers in it now. It's not 100% brilliant anymore. It was 100% brilliant before, but we've had massive improvements on it. A really gentle one is Gut Pro. Then there's custom probiotics. And then there's another brand that's really good, which is called Seeking Health. They do a wonderful 11-strain probiotic as well.
Where do you get these from? Just go online and search.
Yeah. You have to get them all from online, and they're expensive. You need to be prepared for that they cost a fortune because they are so broad spectrum. But when you start on them, you just literally, you don't start by taking 2 tablets twice a day. You start by opening a capsule and maybe sprinkling a little bit in your food and seeing how that goes down for 3 days, doing that once a day for 3 days. And then maybe if you've not noticed any adverse reactions, because probiotics will kill off bad bacteria in your gut that can make you feel a bit unwell, then you up it to half a tablet or a whole tablet, and you just
take it slowly. Just the same as starting sauerkrauts and things, you've got to take that very slowly.
And even with broth, I recommend starting broth slowly, building it up.
And probably starting with less time for cooking as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So broth, a lot of people launch straight into the bone broths, which are very, very nutritious, but the actual bone matter is very difficult to digest. And if you've got gut trouble and mental health trouble, then something that's really difficult to digest is going to cause problems. So start with meat stocks cook for an hour and a half, if that. If you have amine, histamine, salicylate trouble, cook them for 45 minutes, and then freeze the broth. Always have it from frozen. Just be gentle with your body. And
so you wouldn't recommend putting your broths in the fridge for up to a week like they say you can?
I absolutely would if you know that you don't have trouble with amines and histamine.
Okay, so it's more, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so but if you're coming from a fail-safe kind of a diet or an elimination diet where you react to histamines and foods or amines, then those will, they grow. You can't have leftover meat, you can't have leftover broth. So it doesn't mean that you can't do this. It just means you have to
freeze everything,
freeze it and have
start
it
fresh. Yeah.
Don't eat leftover meats, and there's a lot of people who are being diagnosed with those kinds of issues.
There is. I get those questions a lot.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean GAPS isn't for you. It just means you have to adjust.
Yep.
Yeah. And it even doesn't mean you have to do GAPS. Just go back to the beginning again. We're not suggesting everything. Everyone needs to do GAPS. Just suggesting if you're going to have broth. And broth, I don't know if we've explained why broth is so good. There's
maybe you should. We've talked about it on other podcasts, but this needs to stand alone, so that's good. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so broth, only home cooked broth, not the broth that you buy in shops. The broth that you buy in shops has been pasteurized and refined and flavored, and there's no goodness in it and no value to your body in it. Simple as that. As they say, the longer the shelf life, the shorter the human life. If you're making broth at home, one of the important things is to always use organic. And even if it's expensive, and there's a good reason for this, it's because animals that are farmed non-organic have a lot of hormones and a lot of toxins in their diet. And animals tend to pull those toxins into their bones, and that's where they store them. Okay, so organic animals have almost no toxins in their bones. And what you're using is the collagen and the gelatin that comes from around the ligaments and the bones to heal, because those two things, collagen and gelatin, have enzymes in them which cause rapid healing. a rapid regeneration of cells, in particular the cells that are in your gut lining. Yeah. So when you drink broth, your gut lining will heal twice as fast. And that's why people will start drinking broth and they will feel an almost immediate relief of some symptoms because it's fortifying that gut. The gut lining will then come away after 10 days and it will have grown back a little bit stronger. And then you drink the broth, it fortifies your gut, helps you get through. The fat in the broth helps to heal and seal the gut as it's healing. It's a process that takes a long time because we have 60 feet worth of gut. But they've now started even prescribing broth to sports teams to help the players recover quicker from injuries.
That's good, yeah.
It's that powerful, you just got to think about it as speeding up the healing. That's why we drink broth.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. So we've been talking about thyme. We've talked about broth and the probiotic foods like sauerkraut.
And then I would say you would want to also introduce, if you don't struggle with dairy, fermented dairy would be the third critical healing food. So what we're saying is, in order to help your body to start feeling better, think about the things you can bring in rather than the things you have to take out.
Yeah.
So don't worry about the sugars and the grains and all of those things.
At the start, yeah.
The start, yeah. They are.
And you know what? That's probably what is most overwhelming anyway.
Yes, it is.
For people to think about not having bread, not having any sweets, not having any baking.
Their coffee with milk.
With milk, yeah.
The things that actually make you mentally cope during the day. Chocolate and coffee.
Yeah, chocolate and coffee and tea.
Yeah. And then you know what you do is you bring these three healing foods in and you start to feel better. Yeah. And then you kind of fortifying yourself to think, well,
what can
let me look at the quality of the chocolate that I'm eating and the quality of the coffee that I'm drinking. And you start, looking at maybe I could have a dark chocolate instead of a dairy milk chocolate, which is really full of rubbish. And the dark chocolates have less sugar in it and less dairy in it. So so let's try that, and see if I can wean myself onto that chocolate. And you just start. I've seen it so often. People they're so convinced that they can't possibly do this.
Yeah.
And then they start, and then they end up thinking about every single thing that's going into their bodies. And the reason you start thinking about that is because your body's telling you to.
That's right. Your body starts to tell you what you need. You crave good food.
Yeah, and you know what? It's that it's things like salt. We're told we mustn't eat refined salt, and that's true. You shouldn't eat refined salt. But if you want to have mineral salt that's full of magnesium, which we are all depleted in, and the trace minerals, copper and zinc and calcium, then go and buy some pink Himalayan salt and use it as much as you want on your food.
Yeah.
And you will feel, when my kids were on intro, my daughter grabbed the salt and started eating it. She also started eating eggshells.
Oh dear! So obviously needed something.
Depleted in calcium, hence eggshells. It only lasted a day or two.
That's
her body was telling her that she needed the minerals that were in the salt, and she. And when I asked about it with other mums who'd been through it, they were like, "It's a good thing. Let her go. Let her have it as much as she wants." Because raw salt and unrefined salt has the complete opposite health outcome that refined salt has.
Exactly, and that's what I try to tell my husband, because he's like, you can't be having so much salt. And I'm like, no, this is good salt.
Yeah, this is actually, it's ironic, isn't it, that refined salt will destroy your heart health and mineral salt will restore your heart health. They have the two opposite outcomes.
Yep. It's a bit like milk. If you were starting to talk about dairy, maybe you should mention that there with pasteurized milk and...
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing that it took me a little while to get my head around raw milk because the campaign against it has been so successful.
Yeah.
But and again, I have to say that if Woolworths started selling raw milk, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole.
Yeah.
The raw milk that I'm talking about is from organic farmers who have pastured their cows. So the cows are eating grass. They don't have hormones in them. They only eat grass. So they are digesting the grass as they should. There's no infections in their stomach from grains getting stuck in little pockets, causing infection. And the milk that comes out of a cow like that is essential for human health. We just don't have access to that milk.
That's it.
So
what would you recommend for people who live in the city and can't get that kind of milk? I mean, where I live, people have their own cows half the time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we did growing up. I used the bath milk, the bath milk that they sell in health food stores. Those, they say not for human consumption, and the stores aren't allowed to sell raw milk in Australia for human consumption. But it is not illegal for me to choose to buy it and drink it.
Right.
And I've done all my research on it, and I'm perfectly within my legal rights to go and buy raw milk and consume it, and to give it to my children. And the trick is to research the farms that you're buying it from. So Heavenly Bath Milk is a milk that I choose. I then have a raw cream as well that is just wonderful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we make
You're in Brisbane, aren't you?
We're in Brisbane, yeah. But in every state you can get it. And there's always, what I've noticed is that these farmers who sell this milk, they're so good. They test the milk on the premises. It's bottled in a really healthy way. They don't sell it in bulk. It's controlled, and it's So that's what I would do. And we've started ordering that and making up yogurt, not pasteurizing the milk, just making the yogurt from raw.
Yeah. And what, with kefir or?
I do kefir, and I do. I get a yogurt starter, and I literally pour my milk into my bottles, add my starter, and put it in. We use a dehydrator, but you can use an oven. You can use a cooler box, with hot water, other glasses of hot water in there.
What temperature?
Between 35 and 50. It'll ferment beautifully. And you raw milk always ferments a bit differently to pasteurized milk. It's never 100% the texture of it, but put it in smoothies, and we eat it every afternoon. And then we also, the kefir we also make on raw milk. And I struggle with dairy kefir. I think there's a yeast in the kefir that I react to. But funnily enough, I use the same grains on coconut milk, and no reaction whatsoever. So you just have to, again, that took me a long time to get my head around. And I would get mental health symptoms from the kefir, funnily enough. That was the thing I was going to tell you. I accidentally ingested pasteurized milk the other day. I'd ordered a chai latte on coconut milk, and they brought me the wrong drink. They brought me hot chocolate on cream milk, and I drank half of it. It was so delicious. I realized what I was doing, and then I asked the guy, I said, "Is this on milk?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I brought you the wrong coffee." I'm like, "Oh no." Within 2 hours, my arms had gone heavy like lead. I had chronic fatigue symptoms, and I had a kind of a ragey anger and depression symptoms and exhaustion.
And it really affected you so quickly.
So quickly, and it lasted for 2 days. But the funny thing was, it was really good to know, because I had been eating such a clean diet, that pasteurized dairy can do that to me, whereas unpasteurized dairy, I eat a lot of unpasteurized cheeses and milks, have no impact whatsoever.
Wow.
So again, it's like the salt. You've got refined salt and you've got the unrefined salt. You can have two completely different outcomes, and that's because of the enzymes in the unpasteurized milk are actually pre-digested. I think the casein or the lactose is pre-digested. The enzymes exist for human health. They're good for your brain development. All that beautiful animal fat in those things are so good for your gut and your brain. And once we've pasteurized it and homogenized it, we've removed all of that stuff, and so there's no drinking it. There's really no goodness in it. Even the calcium doesn't go to the right place in your body when you drink pasteurized milk. But incredibly, my son as well was anaphylactic to pasteurized milk and could tolerate raw milk.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible thing.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how, well, your case is different really with anaphylaxis, but with most people, they can bring in that, the GAPS yogurt pretty early.
Yeah, if they tolerate dairy. If you don't tolerate dairy, there's a process introducing to build up your tolerance. And the process starts with ghee, which is a clarified butter that doesn't have milk solids in it anymore. And then you move on to the whey from the yogurt, and then the yogurt, and then the sour cream, then the kefir, and then the cheese, in that order.
That's what I wanted to ask you, cheese. What kind of cheeses are not pasteurized, and can you find them in just regular grocery stores?
Sometimes it's tricky. The one that you can always find in the regular grocery stores is Parmesan, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, you just have to look on the label, and it'll always say unpasteurized. And most Parmesans are unpasteurized.
Okay.
You can often find Roquefort, which is actually a sheep's milk cheese.
What's it called?
Roquefort.
Okay.
It's a French blue cheese.
Yep.
There's also other cheeses. I found this little company called smellycheese.com.au. You can go online there and you can search against unpasteurized cheeses and order them. They are pricey because they're allowed to import unpasteurized cheeses into Australia, but we aren't yet allowed to make them ourselves. So that's coming soon because that's anti-competitive. So I'm sure that you'll find that fairly soon. There's a massive lobby now, even from cheesemakers, to be able to produce the unpasteurized cheeses because they taste better.
Okay.
So you can order cheeses online, and and those are the two that I stick to. The kids, I give them an organic pasteurized cheese. I think it's called Organic Dairy Farmers is the brand of the cheese, and they both cope beautifully on that. They don't have any symptoms. But if I have organic pasteurized cheese, I don't get the weird chronic fatigue, depression symptoms, but I do get rhinitis. My nose gets snotty.
Yeah, that's what I find.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's anything. Obviously, we live in a small country town, and my kids love cheese. So I'm just wondering if there's anything I can get locally besides Parmesan.
You'd
to have a look, and
you'd have to find out. You know what? You can make your own cheese as well.
That's what I need to do.
I wanted cheddar, and I want unpasteurized cheddar, so I went and looked at it, and it looks like a bit of a process. But it'd be fun, I think.
It'd be fun. Science experiment for the kids, homeschooling.
The other thing that I do all the time is often my raw milk, will separate too much. There'll be too much whey compared to the curds, and I just drain those through what are those called?
Milk bag.
Bag, almost, yeah. Drain all the whey off, and you keep the whey for fermenting your vegetables, but if you drain it for, I think, at least 6 hours, you end up with this beautiful cream cheese.
Yes.
Just blend it with some garlic chives and lemon and salt and pepper, and have that on some almond bread and to dip carrots. And I do that fairly regularly now. And there you've got an unpasteurized cheese.
And that's with your raw milk yogurt?
Yes, with my raw milk yogurt.
And you can do that with kefir cream as well.
You can do it with kefir. Actually, kefir cheese is really nice.
So I just went to a Jude Leroux 4-day workshop in Perth. It was
lucky woman.
Awesome. I know. I love Jude.
Oh,
and for the first time I had the kefir cream.
Yeah.
And I coped with it really well.
Well done. That's awesome.
I know. And also the cheese. So I was really, because that was, I probably had it over 3 days, three times or so.
Yeah.
And
that's wonderful.
I know. I'm so excited. And I'm not sure. Now and then I get a bit of a stuffy nose, and I'm not sure if it's from having cheeses. But the cheeses we're having at home are not unpasteurized.
Yeah, the stuffy nose would be from the cheeses. And my advice is just to have it start off again. Go very slowly. Start off with it once a week, and then gradually increase it to twice a week. The problem with cheese is it's addictive.
I know. And once you have it, you want to keep having it. The kids especially.
You just want it all day. Yeah, cheese is a tricky one.
That was one of the hard ones to take them off of at the start. And now that they've got it back, there's no giving it up, Mum.
And I've noticed with my kids as well, even on that organic cheddar, that if they have it every single day, my son's dust allergies definitely.
Okay. Yeah.
So we just
take it slowly.
Yeah, he used to get touched by cheese and end up in hospital. So he can have it 6 times out of 7 days. I'm okay with that.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's awesome.
Was there any other things that you think we should know about putting into healing, things that you can put into your diet or life?
What you will find that is you start with those 3, and those will be your foundations.
Yeah.
And as long as you always have those 3 in your diet, they will always bring the health benefits with them.
Yeah.
Anything that you add to that will bring more healing, but not in the same level and to the same degree as those 3 foods. So I always say focus on those 3. And once you focus on those, you will start investigating and learning and educating yourself about your other food choices.
Okay, so the broths, the fermented foods, and the fermented dairy.
Yeah.
And also the probiotics, which you did.
Yeah, and the commercial probiotics I think are really important to have in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, because they bring things that are missing.
Yeah.
That we can't get anymore. Yeah.
And you did mention time as well, so there's 5.
That's right. Nice. Yeah. Turn the clocks off.
Yeah.
In your head.
That's definitely true. So one of the questions I get a lot is how can I sort of hack gaps so that I don't have to do it properly. So this really answers that.
It does, yeah. This
even
is your
if even if you're not starting gaps and you're not going to do it properly, but you want some healing and you're not going to take out a heap of stuff, but you start putting these things in, like you say, your body will start to tell you what you need to do with food, and things that you thought were fine will start being not so great, and you want to change them around.
And you'll notice, so the three things that you bring in for the healing, those are your gaps hacks. They bring healing on their own, but they will never bring 100% healing until you've removed the things that feed the bad parts. Yeah. So long term, down the road, you know how we've turned the clock off, we're not even thinking about you're going to, once you start feeling really well, you're going to want to take refined sugar out of your diet. Yeah. And then you're going to want to take grains out of your diet. But like I said, that sometimes is really, that's a bridge too far for so many people. And I understand.
So don't think about it at the start.
Don't think about it, man. And when you get to the point where your body wants that out, you'll take it out, you'll give it a go, and then you'll see how incredible you feel.
And I think for me, it was definitely like I look back and I started the journey maybe 10, 11 years ago. Yeah. And I started with taking gluten and wheat out, but slowly, like I still had spelt.
Yes.
And then I slowly went to gluten-free mostly. And then I started adding in some grain-free. Now and then I'd still have spelt, but mostly gluten-free and a bit of grain-free. And then it became all gluten-free and a bit of grain-free. And then it slowly went to grain-free.
Yeah, so isn't it funny, the journey, hey? Because, but there's something very important that I want to say about food in general. And that's why I never really start people who are struggling with the idea. I never tell them to take something out of their diet. Food is actually never the problem.
I'm glad you said that. I wanted to talk about that. Go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's two ways of thinking about this. Okay. Food is not the problem. It's what we've done to the food that is the problem.
That's right.
So that's what you'll find you'll start to become more mindful of. So when you want to have grains, you will have organic grains, or you will have ancient grains and things that are easier to digest. That's the first point.
And well prepared so that they are digestible.
Exactly. So that's why sourdough is so brilliant, because it's pre-digesting the stuff that's really hard to digest, and that's why we allow it back on. And the second point is, and that's a hard thing to get your head around, because when you've come from elimination diets, fail-safe, RPAH elimination diet, you are told that food is the problem.
Yeah.
And that's where I disagree. That's where me and
I totally agree with you.
People part ways.
And going to Jude's workshops really reinforced all of that for me.
Yeah.
That we should be able to handle these foods, but only if they're traditional foods, not what she calls it, matrix. The matrix version.
I would call it matrix food as well, and I agree 100%. The second point to also be very, very mindful of is that, because then you'll be like, well, how come they can handle wheat and I can't?
Yes.
It's not just the food, what we've done to the food that is the problem, but in combination with our digestive health. Yeah. If you have a shocking microbiome, you're not going to be able to digest that food. And when you do digest it, you're going to create all sorts of weird chemicals like casomorphine and speed-like chemicals that affect mental health. And that's something they've done a fair bit of scientific research now, which actually proves that especially autistic kids digest dairy and wheat, pasteurized dairy and crappy wheat, into those two chemicals that cause symptoms that cause brain fog, and that cause also symptoms that look a lot like ADHD.
Yeah.
So you've got these two chemicals running around in these kids' brains, and it's just coming from the digestive tract being unhealthy and not being able to digest that food properly.
Yeah.
So when we were on fail-safe, we were told to avoid salicylates, and I always remember being told there's things in the fruit and veg that humans shouldn't be eating, and actually I now understand it's rubbish. Salicylates are very important because what they do is they push a detox. If you are toxic, and if you've got a leaky gut, you are toxic. It means all the toxins that you eat are not going through your liver and out through your stool and urine. They are going into your bloodstream, and your muscles are soaking them up, and your eyeballs are soaking them up. You have a salicylate food, and it triggers a detox. And a person with a healthy gut, that's good. It gives your liver a break. It helps your body to, just get rid of any toxins that are residual. If you are toxic and you eat a salicylate, it triggers a detox, but you are so toxic that suddenly you have eczema breaking out all over your skin, headaches, mental issues, exhaustion. And that's because that food triggered toxic release exactly as it should, as it was designed to do. So the problem is your gut, not the food.
That's so good. We should probably end on that because we've gone over an hour, but it's just amazing to me. I just feel like I'm learning so much more over the last year than in all the years put together before this.
Yeah, I've had that same experience with gaps. It's like my whole life has changed because I have this education now.
But it's like everything was pointing towards this stuff, but it just took me so long to actually get a grip on it and understand it a bit more. And every time I talk to people like you, I just think, wow, why didn't I understand this before? And it's just so important to get this knowledge out there that there is hope.
Yep.
If you have anxiety and depression, there is hope. There is ways to work on it to get your body working together better and healthy so that it can cope with things in life.
Yep.
And there's just like so many people saying food is like you get the whole range of people saying food is not the problem, so eat whatever you want.
Yes.
And just take medication.
Yes.
Or there's the
not the answer either.
Yeah. Or there's the whole food is the problem, so don't eat that for the rest of your life. But we don't want to do either of those. We want to eat the real food that our body understands and copes with and was designed for.
Yes.
But we've got to get our gut to the stage where it can handle that.
Handle it, yeah.
And then there's big changes.
It's the hopeful way, isn't it?
It is. It just makes me so happy to see the changes in our family's health and also in people like you that it's just so encouraging.
Absolutely, yeah.
So encouraging.
And I want to encourage people who are overwhelmed by the idea of it that both Joe and I took a long time. Yeah. It's a journey. Yeah.
And it's not
tomorrow kind of a thing.
Yeah. And just keep that in mind. The whole time thing is not really what you want to be focusing on.
That's what will stop.
Yeah, we'll stop on that. But thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you have questions for Mary, because she is absolutely chock-a-block full of information and help and encouragement and awesomeness, you should totally go to her Facebook page, which is Good Mood Food. She also has the best website with so many great recipes and lots of research. I noticed actually something on your Facebook page this week that was really helpful, and it was talking about how food is not the problem and the latest research on gluten and how it, even if you don't have celiac disease, they've finally decided, yes, you can be affected by gluten even if you don't have the celiac disease.
You're not making it up.
We're not making it up. And so it's good to see the research catching up with what we
already
have observed in our own lives and bodies.
Yeah.
Because some people will not listen to that. They'll only listen to the research. But it is good that they're finally really trying to work all this out. And it takes time.
Oh, we're heading towards an age where we will treat our health issues with bacteria, not medicine. That's what I believe. Yeah.
I think so too. Okay, well, please ask questions if you have them, and if you have more in-depth questions for Mary, maybe we can do another podcast down the track, so just contact me either on my Facebook page, Quirky Cooking. You can also leave comments on thewellnesscouch.com/A Quirky Journey, or you can send me an email via my website, Quirky Cooking, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope you got lots out of it. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, and there's lots more podcasts available on thewellnesscouch.com. And just keep working on those small changes little by little, and we'll be back to share more of our journeys with you next week. Thanks for listening, everyone, and thanks so much, Mary.
No worries. Thanks, Joe.
Bye.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.